Hi everyone and welcome to Ask a Property Manager episode number 87. Today is September 8th, 2021. We're coming to you from Studio 2.0 here at Own Buffalo. I'm Andrew Schultz, principal broker of Own Buffalo Inc. And on today's show, we're going to be talking about the extension of the New York State Eviction Moratorium, what to do when a tenant questions a rent increase. We'll answer some questions from housing providers around the country and so much more. Before we get into that, we are going to plug our social media. New episodes of Ask a Property Manager drop every Wednesday, 10 a.m. Eastern. You can catch those live on Facebook. You can also catch the replay the same day on Facebook and on YouTube. And don't forget about our Instagram. We post content there that doesn't make it to the other two platforms. Last but not least, there is a new episode of the Rent Prep for Landlords podcast dropping tomorrow. That's on Thursday. We're going to be taking a look at what you need to know when you're investing in multifamily rental properties, how to prove that a tenant caused damage to a rental, and what to do when an applicant accidentally reveals a red flag during the screening process. So don't miss out on that. New episodes of the Rent Prep for Landlords podcast drop every other Thursday, the newest one being tomorrow. And you can catch that anywhere podcasts are heard or over at rentprep.com/podcast. We're going to go ahead and jump into our news of the week here, news of the day. This article from the New York Times, it's a little bit lengthier, but it does talk about the New York State eviction moratorium being extended, so I wanted to touch on this. We're going to have another video on this after we have a chance to speak with our attorneys more in depth and find out what the ins and outs of this bill are. We're going to have another extended video talking a little bit more about the inner workings of the bill. So this is much more of just a surface, letting you know, hey, this has been extended. We're now dealing with a whole new set of circumstances, sort of a thing. Title of the article, New York passes bill extending eviction moratorium to January. New York State lawmakers on Wednesday, and this was released on September 1st. That was last Wednesday, but it would have been after we published last week's episode, just for reference. New York lawmakers on Wednesday agreed to extend sweeping protections against evictions into next year, moving to keep hundreds of thousands of people whose finances have been battered by the pandemic in their homes. The move was the first by the state to put in place new barriers to eviction after the U.S. Supreme Court last week rejected the Biden administration's moratorium. It came as many parts of the country, including New York, have struggled to distribute tens of billions of dollars in pandemic rent relief that seeks to address renters' unpaid bills. After a Senate Supreme Court ruling last month blocked a key piece of New York's previous statewide moratorium, many tenant advocates had feared a wave of evictions was looming. But the new agreement, which extends the moratorium through January 15th and was passed by state legislature late on Wednesday, now creates one of the most extensive protections in the nation. Only 5 other states and Washington, D.C. currently have eviction moratoriums in place, according to the White House, and many of those protections expire at some point this year. I think it's huge for renters, said Brendan Cheney, Director of Policy and Communications for the New York Housing Conference, a nonprofit that advocates for affordable housing. He said it gives people more time and more stability to learn about how to access the rent relief program. If you look at the numbers, there are hundreds of thousands of people that seem to be behind on their rent due to the pandemic, owing billions of dollars in rent, and it's clear based on the program that very few of these people have gotten the money they need, he said. The move reflected how, even as vaccinations are helping revive many parts of the economy, the enormous amount of rent owed threatens to hobble the recovery, leaving large numbers of low-income residents facing debt or homelessness. The need in New York is particularly acute. No other state has a higher share of renters than New York, with the vast majority living in New York City. More than 700,000 households are behind on rent, according to recent analysis of U.S. Census data, trailing only California, where about 750,000 households are behind. So those are state numbers, 700,000 in New York and 750,000 in California. The moratorium's extension will mark Governor Kathy Hochul's most significant undertaking since she became the state's top executive last week after Governor Cuomo resigned amid a slew of sexual harassment allegations. Hochul, a Democrat, brokered a deal to strengthen the eviction protections with the Democratic leaders of the state legislature, who often had an adversarial relationship with her predecessor. In a move that underscored the situation's urgency, Hochul called lawmakers back to Albany for an extraordinary session to extend the state moratorium, which expired on Tuesday. Democrats who control the state assembly state Senate and Assembly passed the measures on Wednesday over vociferous Republican opposition. In light of the Supreme Court rulings to strike down the federal eviction moratorium, the Senate majority is taking action to adjust and extend the state's moratorium to ensure that thousands of New Yorkers are protected from losing their homes, and at the same time helping small landlords. Andrea Stewart-Cousins, the Democratic majority leader in the state Senate, said in a statement earlier on Wednesday. The lawmakers believe the legislation will conform with the Supreme Court ruling on the state's previous moratorium. The new measures could face court challenges, with major landlord groups already threatening to file a lawsuit if they believe the legislation will curtail the rights of property owners. On August 12th, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of a group of New York landlords who said they did not have a way to challenge tenants who sought protection from eviction by submitting a so-called hardship claim, a form tenants can fill out saying they've experienced economic hardship because of the pandemic. On Wednesday, lawmakers modified the moratorium to allow landlords to contest such claims in court. Property owners have argued that tenants could use the hardship claims to avoid paying rent even when they have the ability to do so. The new measures will carve out other benefits for landlords, including the addition of a nuisance standard so property owners can commence eviction proceedings if a protected tenant is a nuisance or had heavily damaged a property. The moratorium extension will apply to residential and commercial evictions as well as foreclosures. Tenant groups and landlords, typically at odds, agree that extending the moratorium is a temporary solution that will only go so far if the state does not distribute $2.7 billion in rent relief that has mostly languished, leaving renters and landlords with troves of unpaid bills. The money which the state gives directly to landlords is meant to prevent evictions by covering the unpaid bills of low-income renters, including up to 12 months of past rent, 3 months of future rent, and utilities. But the program, which Mr. Cuomo launched over the summer, had been slow to distribute money, in part because of technical difficulties, but also because many landlords and tenants were unaware of the aid. As of Tuesday, more than $203 million, or about 7% of the money available, have been paid out for about 15,000 households, according to OTDA, who is running the rent relief program. The program also shields tenants from eviction if their application for rent relief is pending. As of August 23rd, the most recent data available, more than 176,000 applications have been received by the state. Landlords and activists said Ms. Hochul, who has made fixing the program a top priority, should focus on the state's effort on reaching every renter in debt and getting them to apply to the program before another moratorium expires again. It is a massive failure that 18 months into this emergency, the state government has not even attempted to gather complete data on exactly how many New Yorkers are behind on rent or how much debt they've accrued, said Jay Martin, the executive director of the Community Housing Improvement Program, a landlord group. Joseph Strasburg, president of the Rent Stabilization Association, which represents some 25,000 landlords of rent-stabilized units, and had sued over the previous eviction moratorium, said the group would consider suing over the new moratorium as well, but how it responds will depend on how hard the law will make challenging the tenant's claim of hardship. He also stated that the state should focus on paying landlords through the rent relief program. We don't want to litigate this, he said, of the moratorium. It's a waste of money and it's a waste of time when we should be focusing our energies on how to get the money out. Still, the agreement on a new moratorium was a major victory for tenant advocates. Sia Weaver, campaign coordinator for Housing Justice for All, said that Cuomo's resignation and the 2 Supreme Court rulings represented a perfect storm for tenants in New York, but she called the agreement a big win. I hope it's going to set the tone for the new administration, she said. Republican lawmakers, however, described the extension as the latest attempt by Democrats to vilify landlords and infringe on their property rights, arguing that tenants, who some lawmakers described as lazy, were gaming the moratorium to avoid paying rent. Some predicted that Democrats would extend the moratorium again in January because 2022 is an election year. I think we're sending the wrong message to society by not, at the very least, providing stronger mechanisms to make sure those who can afford to pay rent and those who are gaming the system should be held accountable, said Assemblyman Michael Fitzpatrick, a Republican from Long Island. It's not fair, it's not right, and I don't think it's good policy at all. But with Democrats in control of both chambers, the extension prevailed by a vote of 38-19 in the Senate and 80-60 in the Assembly. The sluggish page of rent relief and the Supreme Court's ruling on the federal eviction moratorium have placed new urgency on state and local officials to create a patchwork of their own policies across the nation, said Seamus Roller, an executive director of the National Housing Law Project, which advocates for low-income tenants and has filed briefs defending moratoriums in several court cases. Officials in Boston moved this week to ban evictions in the city in the aftermath of the ruling. Mr. Roller said that outside of New York, there was no other state that I'm aware of that's talking about such a significant leap. I think we all hope that the rental assistance programs would be up and running. We all hope the pandemic would be functionally over at this point. Neither of those things is true. I think that lots of people are scrambling to get a hold of all this to keep, a lot of people are scrambling to hold all of this together to keep us from ending up with a new huge problem around homelessness. So there's a few things in here that I wanted to go back and look at, things that I'd highlighted. Obviously, we now understand that the new eviction moratorium does extend us out to January 15th. So that's where we're at in terms of the date on this thing. Scrolling down here. Though lawmakers believe the legislation will conform with the Supreme Court ruling on the state's previous moratorium, the new measures could face court challenges, with a major landlord group already threatening to file a lawsuit if they blah, 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 blah. Yes, there's going to be challenges on this. I'm certain that there have already been challenges filed. If not, I'm sure they're pending right now. This is not going to just, nobody's going to just stand up and take this. There are going to be people that try to fight this in the courts and try to get this eviction moratorium overturned. In addition, based on the limited research I've done on the new eviction moratorium, there's language in the state's version of the new eviction moratorium that is actually completely contradictory to the way the federal law lays out how funds are supposed to be distributed to landlords and tenants and things like that. So the state's now created a new set of circumstances where they have to go to the federal level and ask for them to modify their program so that they can run the state program the way that they want to. It's quite a mess. On Wednesday, lawmakers modified the moratorium to allow landlords to contest such claims in court. This is talking about the tenants that are claiming hardship declarations and things like that. There will now be an option for landlords to be able to argue those in court, to try to say, okay, this tenant needs to prove that this hardship is actually valid. We don't know what that process is going to look like. No one seems to know what that process is going to look like yet. New measures will carve out other benefits for landlords, including the addition of a nuisance standard. We had a nuisance standard. We had a nuisance standard at the beginning of the pandemic. The problem was none of the courts were open and no one would hear any of the cases. So all of the nuisance standards were just never heard. And I don't think many of them have still been heard. The other issue is the nuisance standard is a very, very difficult standard to meet. Which I suppose it probably should be, but you're talking about situations where tenants could be posing dangers to other tenants. You could have somebody dealing drugs out of the house, which might be difficult to prove, things of that nature. You know, it's not like you can just snap a finger and create a nuisance standard. You have to basically document it over time, and the entire time that you're working on documenting, that tenant is acting in or against your best interests. So that's something to keep in mind as well. Scrolling down a little bit, we'll only go so far if the state does not distribute $2.7 billion in rent relief. So we talked last week about I think it was $46.5 billion that had been distributed to all of the states. And at the time, I did not have available a number for the state of New York. We now have a number. I haven't researched it. I would hope that the New York Times did. But they're saying $2.7 billion in rent relief has been sent to New York State. And of that, $203 million, or about 7% of the money available, has been paid out in New York State. This is infuriating. There are programs out there, and I know I'm soapboxing. I'll try to get off this topic soon. There are programs out there. This money could have been rolled out through the federal Section 8 programs that already had all of the administration pieces in place to make this program a success, and they didn't do it. Instead, they pushed it to the state level and told the states, build a new mousetrap to handle this. And it took forever for them to do it. And the program doesn't work. It's painfully obvious that the program doesn't work when they've had some of this money since January and the remainder of this money since April, June? I can't remember when the second round of it was paid out. But you're talking about $2.7 billion and you've only managed to distribute 7% of it. 15,000 households have received these funds when you have 176,000 households that are waiting for these funds. That's garbage. It's a very, very poorly executed program. Scrolling down, we don't want to litigate this. It's a waste of money and it's a waste of time when we should be focusing our energies on how to get the money out. Agreed. No one wants to spend the time litigating these eviction moratoriums that we have a very strong feeling are unconstitutional. I'm not an attorney. I'm not going to call it unconstitutional. But, you know, that's the problem. None of us want to spend our time litigating this. We want to get back to the business of running our businesses. The problem is the state is standing in our way in the distribution of this money. I think we all hope that the rental assistance programs would be up and running. We all hope that the pandemic would be functionally over at this point. Neither of these things are true. I think lots of people are scrambling to hold all of this together to keep us from ending up with a new huge problem around homelessness. That's a statement I'll agree with. We all hope that the programs will be up and running. We all hope that the pandemic would be functionally over. If you could get this money distributed, in my eyes, real estate seems to be the only industry that is being prevented from operating in the traditional capacity. Restaurants are back to full capacity here in Western New York. Sports stadiums are operating at, I believe, full capacity here in Western New York. Masks, no masks, whatever. I'm not getting into all that. But for whatever reason, real estate seems to have, you know, something holding the gears back, allowing us to actually run our businesses the way we see fit. And I hope that New York State, I hope that they do challenge this eviction moratorium, and I hope that it is found to be unconstitutional so that we can at least start processing some of these eviction cases. I mean, we've talked about the wave of evictions before. They created their own self-fulfilling prophecy, and this is a very classic example of how they did it. I'm going to move on, because I'm sure you guys are sick of listening to me soapbox about that. We will talk more about it probably later this week, beginning of next week, once we release our next video, kind of highlighting the ins and outs of the new moratorium. This article from CNBC just kind of goes to show you what happens when luxury goes bust. Mansion was once asking $39 million, sells for $4.6 million. Here's what happened. We'll take a brief look at this article. We'll look at a couple of the pictures and things like that, just so you can get a feel for this. But this just struck me as an interesting article to cover. A mansion once hailed as one of the most expensive homes for sale in New Jersey has seen its price drop like a ton of bricks. Back in 2013, the 28-room estate at 83 North Woodland Street in Englewood, known as the Gloria Crest Estate, hit the market with a $39 million price tag. The property's name harkens back to its original owners in the 1920s, but soon after it was built, the extravagant ivory-colored home was dubbed the White House of Englewood. In the 8 years following its debut at $39 million, public records show the almost 100-year-old mansion located in Bergen County saw its jumbo price tag chopped down to size in a series of massive price reductions. In 2014, after a year on the market, it went from $39 million to $25 million. Price cuts continued over the next couple of years, and by 2017, it was down to $17 million. Then in February of 18, records showed that the property was foreclosed upon when the owners defaulted on a $7.3 million mortgage by U.S. Bank. It was briefly taken off the market until June 2018, when it was put up for sale again, this time for $12 million under a new list agent. Then from 2019 to 2021, the listing was represented by yet another broker, and the price got hacked 6 more times, falling from $9.9 million down to $5.9 million. Over the same 8 years, the property went through at least 4 listing agents. The most recent real estate broker to represent the home was Michelle Pays, CEO of Signature Realty NJ. It was her listing through the last 6 price cuts before she finally got it sold. A home is worth what a buyer is willing to pay for it, she told CNBC. What a buyer wants and what an appraiser says is irrelevant, and that goes for any home. And I highlighted this because that's garbage. What a buyer wants and what an appraiser says is irrelevant only if it's a cash transaction. Otherwise, what the appraiser says is very relevant. So that was something that I wanted to point out because I thought it was funny. Last month, a buyer who she said isn't at liberty to name was willing to pay $4.6 million for the mansion and the almost 5 acres it sits on. The closing price was a whopping 88% discount from its original asking price and wasn't even enough to cover the 2018 loan default. According to the floor plans, the home has about 15,000 interior square feet across 4 levels, putting the mansion's price per square foot at about $300. That's 34% lower than the average $436 price per square foot seen in Englewood's August home sales data, according to Redfin. So why did the price plummet? She offers her insight. While she appreciated the home's history and its architecture, which dates back to 26, some potential buyers did not, and for those who were fans of the home's Mediterranean villa-inspired exterior and the ornate details inside, there were other issues. $163,000 tax bill, and the place was in need of a renovation, Pice said. For some potential buyers, the $13,653 a month in real estate taxes was a tough pill to swallow. Yeah, it's a tough pill to swallow, I would say. But when you're buying a multi-million-dollar property, you know, it is what it is. The cost of renovating the home this size didn't help. She pegs the budget for updating at between $3 and $5 million. I'm just going to kind of skip through the rest of this here. I did want to show you guys the photos a little bit so you could see what the place looks like. And then off the list agent's website, there were a couple of really nice photos here as well. Just a few. I mean, it's a gorgeous estate. Obviously, for that kind of money, you would certainly hope that it would be. But it just, that's crazy though, to go from $39 million to a final sale price of $4.67. Here's something I didn't mention. This is the last line in the article. Interestingly, after all the price adjustments, the old White House closed at almost the same price it traded for 21 years ago. Public records show the estate sold in 2000 for $4.67 million. So I just thought that was interesting to see that you can have a piece of property that you think is worth $39 million and have it sell for 4.6 and have it take years to actually sell. That's crazy. All right, let's take a look at some funny things that I found over the internet this week. Oh God, I forgot about this one. Please don't do this. Any kind of painting over anything drives me nuts in a rental. Painting over bugs especially drives me nuts. That's disgusting. But the one that really drives me nuts is when somebody will paint over like a piece of Scotch tape, because you'll never be able to get the tape off the wall and you'll always see the outline of it. Just a little funny image on what it's like to buy a house in 2021. I think that's starting to change here in Western New York, to be honest with you. I think that the market's starting to slow down a little bit. We're starting to see some price reductions and things like that. But I guess we'll see what the data shows over the next couple months as to whether or not our market's slowing down or keeping on pace. We're going to go into our questions from housing providers around the country here, starting with this one on tenants questioning a rent increase. Hey guys, ever have a tenant demand the reasons for your rent increase? I want to be tactful, but I also don't want to provide ammunition for their rebuttals. The increase is modest at 5% and they are well below market average. So ultimately, it's up to you what you decide to say in a situation like this. You could just send a letter telling them that the rent is going up. You can choose to include reasons in that letter or not. But at that point, there's really no verbal discussion unless the tenant comes to you and approaches you directly to ask you the questions. We have had tenants ask why the rent increases, and our answer is pretty much typically the same thing. The cost of the property, the cost of operating the property's gone up. Their taxes go up every year. The cost of building materials and labor goes up every year. Insurance prices go up every year. You know, when things go up, the cost of living goes up. Rent has to go up to accommodate that. It's not as though you can just continue to pay the same thing year over year and expect to receive the same service in the same capacity. You know, things break, things wear out, things need to be repaired, and the property has to be kept at market rents in order to make that operation happen. And generally speaking, most tenants are pretty receptive to that. They understand that the cost of living does go up because they see it in their own personal lives when the cost of a steak or a gallon of milk or whatever goes up. So it's something that makes sense as long as you're not making a massively huge swing in your rent. 5% I think is pretty reasonable. At 5%, you're not talking about a massive increase, but you do need to check your state laws regarding how to do a rent increase properly, how much notice you have to give, things like that. So here in New York, it's 30 to 90 days, depending on the length of tenancy, before you can increase the rent by more than 5%. So if you are looking at increasing your rents, understand what your state laws are and make sure that you are abiding by that. The other thing I wanted to mention is if you are increasing your rents, make sure that you're keeping them in line with what the market rents for your area are. You don't want to wind up above market value because eventually that tenant's going to go and find something that's at market value to move into. Likewise, you don't want to be below market value because then you're literally losing money every single month that tenant is paying under market value on the rent. So you want to make sure that you're staying as close to market as possible for all of the reasons that we just talked about, for all of the things that go up on a yearly basis. On to our next question here. Buyers demanding new windows. This is a good one. You're going to like this. I'm in contract to sell a property, and the buyer says they will not go forward unless I replace 5 windows at a cost of about $2,000. Aside from the fact of how can they do this if it's already signed, how do I secure myself that once I spend this money, they will continue with the deal as we are now 4 to 6 weeks out for windows. By then the price on the house could be less or more, I don't know. I don't mind spending the extra $2,000 as long as I'm secured for the deal. The buyer signed and waived their inspection, and then the next day came back to the property on their own and inspected or viewed it again. Not sure if they brought a professional in at all or not. I'm going to start this one by prefacing and saying I'm not a lawyer. You definitely need to speak to your attorney on this situation. The contract is going to tell us all here, and obviously we don't have it. But it sounds to me like you don't have any obligation to replace these windows. If it wasn't written into the initial purchase contract, they've gone through, they had their home inspection, they've waived their home inspection, and it wasn't requested as part of their home inspection, it sounds to me like you're not really going to be under much of an obligation to do this work. I'm kind of mad that they returned to the property unannounced. That's them, trespassing essentially on the property. If they didn't have an appointment or any reason, any authorized reason to be at the property and they returned unannounced, that's trespassing, plain and simple. I would have a very, very big problem with that. Beyond that, though, this is basically them trying to put pressure on you, in my opinion. Maybe they want out of the deal and they think that this is enough to do it. Maybe they think that they can push you to get the work done and they can get away with it. But if I was you in Western New York, and I don't think this was a Western New York sale, I don't know what market you were in. In Western New York, with our market still being pretty heavily favoring the seller, I would stand my ground and not do the windows. There are a lot of buyers in today's market here in Western New York, and for somebody to come in and demand windows outside of the contract, outside of the inspection contingency, it's just not going to fly in our market here. Maybe you're in a market where it's a buyer's market. If you are in a buyer's market, then all right, well, maybe there's some discussion to be had there. But, assuming you want to keep going, I would stand my ground and just say no. Assuming you wanted to keep going, there are a couple of options that you have here. The first option would be just rather than do the windows and screw around with the 4 to 6 week window, waiting for the windows to come in, getting them installed and everything, just credit $2,000 on the sale price at the time of closing. This way you're not offering them anything until they get to the closing table, and that way you've secured that the property's actually closed. They've secured either basically a credit so they can come in and do the windows after the fact. Another option would be do the work, but increase the purchase price by $2,000 and hope that the property closes. Not a real great option because you're left spending $2,000 and hoping that somebody else is going to perform on a contract. Obviously, these people are not really interested in performing on contracts to the letter of the contract because they're already putting you in a position where you shouldn't be. So that's probably the least best option available on the table here. And then option 3, tell them you'll do the work pre-close for the $2,000 or $2,500, whatever it was, up front, non-refundable. So essentially make them pay for the work up front, and then you don't have to worry about it, because if they don't close, well, the work's already paid for and it's non-refundable. Essentially, you're making them put more skin in the game if they really are interested in the property. So that's another option. You've got a couple different options to play with there. I probably, if you really wanted to go forward with this, would just lean toward offering the $2,000 credit, because then nobody's screwing around waiting for windows and everything else. You say 4 to 6 weeks for a window delivery. You're probably going to be looking at another week or so to get the things installed. So you might be talking 5 to 7 weeks, and that's assuming everything goes according to plan. We're at about 9 weeks for windows out here right now. To have any sort of custom windows done from the supplier that we typically use, we're looking at about a 9-week turnaround right now. So your 4 to 6 weeks could extend very, very easily, which then you could be extending your closing period and everything else. You're better off, if you want to move forward with this, offer the credit on the sale and just move on. Last but not least, cracks in the concrete slab. Hello, I went to look at a rental to buy and I noticed these raised cracks on the garage floor. Does anyone know what might have caused them? There is a tree outside and I checked to see if maybe the crack came from there, but the crack starts at the garage door and the sidewalk looks fine. And I'm going to show you the pictures here. So this is the picture that was submitted right along with. You can see that's a substantial crack, both in terms of length and in terms of offset. In the image on the left side there, you can see there's a pretty substantial shift to the pad there for where that crack is. So something has definitely gone wrong on this concrete pad. In my opinion, the entire garage needs to be checked over. That is a substantial amount of shift to cause a crack that long with that much offset. So maybe the base wasn't laid right or something along those lines. This could require the removal of the entire pad, some groundwork underneath, and a repour. You might be able to do something to raise the foam, to raise the concrete using some of those new expanding foam products where they kind of go under the pad and pump foam, and it raises the plane of the pad up. You might have some luck with something like that. I don't know. I'm not there. It's tough to see from just the photos that we've been afforded here. But this is definitely not the type of situation that you want to ignore. This is a run, don't walk situation if this is not a project that you would be comfortable tackling. If it is something that you're comfortable tackling, just make sure you do your due diligence and get as much information as you can before you move forward on the purchase of that property. Going back to the photo here real quick, I can almost guarantee you that if you're doing a transaction that requires financing, this is going to raise the eye of any appraiser. I mean, that's a pretty obvious structural issue. I'm pretty sure any appraiser would notice that fairly easily and would question it as well. So that's where I would be on that. Do your due diligence and understand what you're getting into, but there's definitely something wrong there, and it definitely warrants further exploration. That pretty much wraps this thing up for this week. That's the end of this week's episode of the Ask a Property Manager Show. Thank you all so much for watching. We truly do appreciate it. We love producing Ask a Property Manager, and you can help us to improve by dropping a question in the comments either on Facebook or on YouTube. Your question may be picked up and answered in an upcoming episode. If you enjoyed this content, or if we brought some value to you today, do us a favor and hit that thumbs up button. YouTube and Facebook both push videos based on community feedback, so every like, comment, subscribe, and share helps us to grow and reach more people. We'll be back next week on Wednesday, September 15th at 10 a.m. Eastern with another show you won't want to miss. Thank you all so much for watching, and we'll see you next week.